So we are going to start now with our session on decolonizing astronomy, which a lot of the talks throughout the week have touched base on and in different forms. But we're going to start off with Doug Sam coming up and talking to us about colonialism and eclipses. Right, there you are.
Make it out there, right?
You'll be all right. Do you want to use this mic or this mic?
I'll use that one.
Yay!
Yeehaw. Right. Shechatwai, Iknashwanik Doug Sam, Washnash Portland Connect, Nashakan Hahi Jimpa, Washnash Skulisa, who subsequently Hui, Mitao Schooling Pamapa Ulikan Pa, Imi subsequently Yin, Ichishkin Sinwiki, Pawa Reagan Anderson, who applied to Hamshish, Imi subsequently History Key, Iwa Marsha Weisiger. I'm grateful to join you all here on Wurundjeri lands and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'm also privileged to come to you from Kalapuya Ilahi, the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people, where I received an education in Ishkin Sinwit, Sahaptin, one of the languages of the land which I was happy to greet you in, and tell you a little bit more about myself and my teachers. My name is Doug Sam, and I'm primarily an environmental historian and historian of Native America, and a PhD candidate at the University of Oregon. This presentation includes descriptions of colonialism and violence. It also contains images of solar eclipses and those who have passed on. So if you need to step out or otherwise take care of yourselves, please do what is appropriate for you. So the American West is home to dozens of major telescopes. And it is also home of some of the most controversial telescopes. And as a historian, I wanted to ask, how did we get here? And did it have to be this way? How did the West become astronomical? And this is what leads me to the beginnings of what established the American West as a place for astronomy, which are these set of 5 eclipses and the expeditions and reactions to them. Those of you who are keen readers of the abstracts will note that I originally miscounted 4. Sorry, historian, bad at math. But this is what we're going to be focusing on here. Alas, for those of you who are fans of the 1880 eclipse, I will be ignoring it. Yell at me about it in questioning. So why eclipses? First, they are sublime and they are powerful. Eclipses carry meaning for both Native Americans and Euro-Americans, even if they differed in exactly what those meanings were. Second, expeditions were extremely resource intensive, meticulously planned for years, and often sponsored by an imperial state who eagerly sought the data and glory that could be harvested only in those few minutes of totality. Finally, considered together, this set of events gives glimpses into the changing relationship between the United States, American science, and indigenous nations. This isn't going to transition, but that's going to be okay. So why this time? Between 1860 and 1890, the United States moved from a period of violent internal sectionalism, culminating in the American Civil War, to a resumption of the so-called Indian Wars to conquer the indigenous nations of the Intermountain West. And these wars end in 1890 at Changpei, Opi, Wakpala, Wounded Knee Creek. It does transition. This one does anyway. So this, of course, also comes with the final theft of land in what is now the continental United States from indigenous nations and the incorporation of these lands formally and legally into the United States. Meanwhile, as astronomer T.H. Stafford here notes, from a nearly moribund state at the beginning of the 19th century, American astronomers over this time period emerged as leaders in the world of indisciplinary science, not least because of the opportunities afforded to them in the conversion of the American West from an indigenous space into a scientific one. These are some of the processes underway and not yet completed as these eclipses swept over indigenous lands. Whether or not the US could repel or police Native peoples there, the eclipse was going to happen at a certain time and a certain place. And if astronomers wanted to study it, they had to contend with Native labor, Native power, and Native violence. And so now my argument. This is an old version. So we'll see what happens with that. So now my argument. My first contention is that Native power and peoples played a significant role in establishing and contesting the American West as a place for astronomy. And my second contention is that the establishment of these high altitude observatories that we see today throughout the West, those only become possible after the precedent set by the successful eclipse research in the mid 19th century. So we're going to start with the 1860 eclipse. The United States is horribly deadlocked in sectional debates, and very little is getting done in Congress or in science. Nevertheless, there were three eclipse expeditions sent out by the US, none of which were particularly successful. So here is sort of the path of the eclipse and some of the places that astronomers were working during that eclipse. In particular, I want to talk about the one that occurred here in the middle of Saskatchewan. This wayward expedition of the Nautical Almanac Office to the Winnipeg country was arguably the least successful of them all, and yet it was also the most important for demonstrating the reliance that expeditions could have on native knowledge, kinship, networks, and labor. Indeed, reading from Samuel Scudder's partially fictionalized account of his participation in this expedition, he and the other philosophers, as he called them, were almost entirely reliant on native labor to do basically everything from them, from setting up their tents in the rain to cooking their nearly monotonous meals of pemmican. But most importantly, it was their muscle power and decision-making that defined the expedition. Nearly all daily decisions were made by their head guide, George Kipling, of Ojibwa descent. And over their nearly 5 weeks of travel, it was his knowledge of the river, his kinship networks, and his language skills that were critical to opening up Anishinaabe and Nehiawaski Anishinaabe and Cree homelands to them. And it was also the native crew who, at Kipling's direction, because this was a horribly planned expedition, to continuously paddle for 2 days and 2 nights up the swollen Saskatchewan River that got them into the path of totality to begin with, where they were clouded out. So following the embarrassment of 1860, American astronomers were quite keen for the 1869 eclipse, which would start in Alaska, newly purchased as an American territory. Though this land was new to the United States, for Alaska natives, including the Tlingit living in the Chilkat River, which you see right there at the very top, the swapping of Russian colonists for American ones meant very little. We'll see. I didn't have that one. So Chief Koklux was not necessarily thrilled when George Davidson and the Coast Survey showed up at his doorstep. Davidson wrote his report that the tribe of the Chilkats was considered the most hostile in the coast. Even so, Davidson was supremely confident in himself, boasting really in his report that my experience upon this coast with Indian tribes was such that I declined the escort of soldiers. The officers looked upon my undertakings as reckless. I did not. For all this animosity, though, Davidson's party and others were completely reliant on native labor to again paddle and transport their equipment. And the ways that astronomers were able to move through this indigenous space was predicated on native willingness to labor and transport them. And in another version of this PowerPoint, there is also a map that I would show you. So pretend that there is a map on the screen that is not this one. As Davidson tells it, his power was actually so manifest in his quote-unquote prediction of the eclipse that Chief Koklux drew a map with 2 of his wives, recording Tlingit names and places for him, showing the geography of Southeast Alaska, British Columbia, and the Yukon, giving colonists the first insights into the geography of a region they hardly knew and had hardly any other knowledge about. Davidson's power is not incidentally supported by the historical record. Meanwhile, in Dakota Territory, the Fort Laramie Treaty, concluded just a year before, ended a war for survival between the Oceti-Sakowin, the Sioux Nation, which include the La, Na, and Dakota people, and the United States. We'll return to the story, but for now, the serendipitous period of peace in 1869 allowed the Cincinnati Observatory Party to research in relative safety. Director Cleveland Abbey's report wrote, in fact, nothing about Native Americans, even though they were observing on native lands. Instead, only complaining about how difficult it was to transport his equipment through, quote, 600 miles of wilderness. empty, of course, because of genocide and deportation. While the archive preserves very little of contemporary Lakota perspectives on the eclipse, this illustration of Lone Dog's winter count illustrates that it was still a significant and memorable event for them as well. You'll see the eclipse at the very, very top, that black circle with the two red stars. So despite moderate American success, these eclipse expeditions were able to harvest a little bit of data. Most of the major discoveries were unfortunately accomplished by Europeans in Europe, which brings us to 1878. As astronomers and tourists rode new rail lines out to the mountains, they were acutely aware that relationships with native nations was approaching a nadir out west. It had only been 2 years since Custer's 7th Cavalry was crushed at Little Bighorn by an alliance of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho. And it had not yet been a year since the Nez Perce had surrendered when Chief Joseph delivered his heartrending "I will fight no more" forever address. More immediately, they also knew that half of Colorado, where many of them were headed, was still primarily in Ute hands, and tensions with the Utes were rising. You'll see Colorado, Denver in number 5 there, and number 1, that yellowish area, is the Ute reservation at the time. But tensions with Utes were rising. Treaties were being broken, Utes were starving, and Frederick Walter Pitkin was campaigning for governor on the slogan that the Utes must go, promising their final removal and genocide. This did not deter any of the expeditions in Colorado or Wyoming, but war with the Bannocks out in my backyard in eastern Oregon and northern Paiutes on the Malheur Reservation, which you'll see here in 4, caused the U.S. Naval Expedition to cancel their Montana expedition, writing here that it was due to the apprehended Indian troubles, Montana being too far outside the shield offered by U.S. colonialism. Meanwhile, you don't have to actually take down anything on this particular slide, but the point is the Bureau of Indian Affairs was also a mess. Commissioner of Indian Affairs Ezra A. Haight saw himself as a bit of a reformer and was also horribly corrupt and had no idea what he was doing. So he shuffled in political allies as new Indian agents. Established agents with whom tribes had relationships were rotated out, and new agents who had no idea what they were doing and often just blamed the last guy for any of the problems that existed. Those people, Utes and Shoshones and others, could not build any relationships with or trust with, especially since they got rotated out so often under Haight. You'll notice, for example, on the Los Pinos agency, during the years of Haight's commissionship, they had a different agent for every single year. Tensions would boil over at another Ute agency at White River, where their bumbling, bothersome agent N.C. Meeker was killed by White River Utes for his incessant attempts to convert them a year after the eclipse. That this violence did not happen earlier was simply a matter of luck, and astronomers knew and they feared it. One astronomer, rejecting an invitation to join an expedition, replied to his colleague, "Take care not to get scalped by the Indians." So now, one final and tragic story that does connect violence and eclipses more directly. In 1889, an eclipse passed over what is now Nevada. Jack Wilson, who you see here on the historian, bad at math, bad at quants, on the left. So Jack Wilson, or Vovoka, a northern Paiute prophet in Nevada, was ill. When the sun died on January 1st, he fell unconscious and went up to heaven. He saw God and all the people who had died a long time ago. God told me to come back and tell my people they must be good and love one another and not fight or steal or lie. He gave me this dance to give to my people. The ghost dance has numerous historical interpretations, but at its core, it was a vision of a modern indigenous future. But as Wovoka's message spread, it panicked the United States. Nowhere was this more apparent than where we just were in 1869 among the Lakota. Tired of being starved and mistreated, many left the reservations. The US Army was dispatched against those who could not be cajoled back, and they attacked at Wounded Knee Creek on December 29th, 1890. At the end of the day, over 200, possibly as many as 300 Lakota lay murdered on the frozen ground. Within 2 years of when this eclipse first inspired Vovoka's prophecy, over a thousand miles away, his powerful vision of a renewed native world lay dead upon the frozen Dakota plains. And it was from this moment on that astronomers and other colonists felt entitled to finally convert the frontier of the native West into a new astronomical West, a place to study the final frontier with impunity. So, some conclusions. Eclipse expeditions demonstrated American competence in science, but that success came primarily from native labor, knowledge, and guidance, which were as crucial to their success as native power and colonial impotence and incompetence contributed to their failures. And of course, science never exists in a vacuum. Eclipses, astronomy, science are all social and contingent creations. But also, these entanglements of the past, though we need to understand them, need not define us and our path moving forward. As we continue to think about our discussions here with decolonization, indigenous knowledge, and the future of astronomy, I've hoped and showed that history can be tragic, but also empowering. We got here through the decisions and actions of people like us, and the choices that they made. Now it is our moment in history, whether it's the American West, the Australian outback, or the heavens above. What do we want these places, our field, and our futures to look like? Let us use our learning here to seize our moment and make choices with more wisdom in our mind and justice in our hearts. Payumash Kwasanusha, thank you all very much.
Thanks, Doug. Any questions? Have any questions online? Alejandro?
As expected.
Thank you very much. An amazing presentation.
Thank you.
It's very interesting that at the same time, the same kind of colonial expansions, of course, in the south part of South America. And maybe it's interesting for you to pay attention at the scientific observations that are made with the military troops, because they have officials that are trained in astronomy and make observations for the astronomers. And also, I think it's maybe useful for you that in the same time exists this process of change of astronomy as an academic science from astrometric to astrophysics.
Yes.
That changed the position of the USA in the international panorama at the exactly same time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. Most of these expeditions were actually led by military officers.
One more question? Danielle?
You essentially asked me to ask you this question.
Oh, okay.
1880. Why did you exclude that? Did that have different dynamics in play?
Yeah, there's a couple of things with 1880, so we'll just go to this map here. It didn't cover a lot of ground, and not a lot of people actually studied it. In terms of why I left it out, bad research on my part, frankly. But in terms of the actual primary sources that are available out there, basically it's a couple of newspaper reports and complaints of like, this was so interesting from Salt Lake. I wonder why nobody else was studying it. So there's not a whole lot out there, at least from my understanding at this moment.
You might look into the records from the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, because I believe that was an important one for them as it went through San Francisco. I think that was close to their founding.
I'll do that. Thank you very much.
Great. Oh, yep. Building?
Yeah, so you note the eclipse of 1860 in Labrador, and then the outside wood. What about research there, and were you also looking at the transit of Venus excursions as well that kind of play a role in this? And the third, what about some of the British predating excursions, such as the eclipse of Newfoundland in 1762 by James Cook, which probably led him to being selected to go to the Pacific. So do those kind of earlier excursions kind of play a role here as well?
Undoubtedly. It was sort of just a matter of selection of what type of story I wanted to tell, and how do I get across these broader points. But certainly those imperial expeditions have been studied before. There's another fabulous book about it, which of course sets up these American expeditions. This particular set of eclipses I wanted to focus on, though, because they were all over what is now the United States. And so while there were some international observers there, actually many, this was also a place that American astronomers felt like they had particular ownership over these events. And so paired with these broader aspirations of the United States to enact manifest destiny. And with regards to the transit of Venus, yeah, many of these people also were observing them at similar times using similar equipment. Again, just a matter of what are the particular events that I wanted to pick as evidence for this broader story.
Right, thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. So it's Linnea. Excellent talk on decolonizing astronomy. Looking forward to this. Do you want to use this or just that?
We'll use this. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Joanne. And we have been having really fantastic 2 weeks for those who joined last week for the school as well. So a lot of really nice perspectives and conflicting views, which are also necessary. But it's nice to actually have all this in a one venue. And I'm still processing some of the things we discussed last week. So I need a bit of time to actually even think about like what's happening this week. So I'm from Astrobiology and Society, which is quite different, and at the Earth Life Science Institute in Tokyo. But I also work with the United Nations as chairing decolonizing science sessions on as a part of the General Assembly every September. So today we'll focus on astronomy and space exploration, and these topics usually seen as very universal. We use astronomy for everybody, astronomy for all, and gives this apolitical and a very purely rational sort of view. But it's far from the truth and far from the lived experiences of many. And even last week, what we discussed at the school, these talks are online. Please go and watch. These fields are more about empire, exclusion, and extraction. And this is, and you might actually already start thinking where these are coming from. And so it comes to the point also, who holds the power and where are these actually instrumentation institutions are actually run by. So why is this relevant to United Nations and why are we doing these sessions? So in this talk today, I'm presenting for what we discussed last 3 years. And every year there are many sessions that focus on decolonizing science. And in fact, some of the speakers are actually part of this symposium and the school last week. And I think Jarita is here, and Alvin is here, and Yuko is also online today giving a talk. So, and these sessions are actually not academic exercises, and they're more for look into what are how the changes can be made and policy level. And it's a platform for sort of a change to bring different stakeholders together and sort of redefine these ethical and shared sort of views. And even though I use the word shared, it's not always shared. There's 90% of the things we discuss doesn't really work in the way that we are thinking. But there's usually like 10% that works, and that actually is really important. And so I'll go through some of the things we discussed in the past 3 years And I might actually skip some of them, but there's already a long paper on this that are being built that will be part of the proceedings. Politics of place. So land is something really important for all the sciences and all the humans and cultures and so on. So we all often think about observatories and occupation together, and it's not very simply a matter of geography. And some of these locations, due to astronomical observational importance, has become these really prized lands and locations that are really, really important. But by doing so, we have the tendency, I'm an astronomer also, so we have the tendency, and I'm part of the problem. We have the tendency to sort of look at that we want to focus on this part of astronomy for next decade, and we need these instrumentations. And to build these instrumentation, these are the prime locations around the world. So let's get that done one way or the other. So even though we claim to be in certain ways like this is actually good for the local communities and so on, we already set an agenda from day one, and we have to reach that goal somehow. So as scientists, we always think this is for the science, and science is universal and so on, and it's for everybody's benefit. So, and one of the things that we do to sort of filter this is public engagement or community engagement. One of the interesting things that all these observatories and facilities around the world are guilty of is actually sort of justifying everything that we have done through public engagement, that we share knowledge of astronomy as public engagement, and that's how sort of we justify using the lands and being here and sort of using all the resources. And most of the time, these kind of public engagement comes when there's sort of like local questionings arise, that what are you actually also doing with locality? And then suddenly we jump into let's do some community work. So let's get some public engagement running. And it's almost an effort to say, look at the science we do, how great it is, but forget about everything else that's going on. And so we are sort of putting plasters, and there's a problem, but look at the beautiful pictures we have, beautiful images we have, and let's focus on that, because that's what we want to actually bring to the community. And so we haven't really reached as a scientific community this through co-governance in setting up things and defining and sort of going forward. And so it was kind of really nice to see yesterday, day before, the SKO panel, that there were so many different viewpoints. I would have listened to that panel one full day, honestly, that they had a lot of things to share. And this also brings up to this sort of duality of perspective, how different cultures and different localities and indigenous communities see and experience things, and how Western science that we all pretty much have studied from school to high school to university and continue to study at universities and do research in a sort of looking at very logical way. And these go from being knowing, authoritative, and knowledge production, and even time. That time of I was just thinking how to explain this. I remember when I love cooking. Next time I'm in Melbourne, please invite to use your kitchen. I love cooking, so I'm happy to go. And But I didn't learn cooking by a recipe. I always learned by being in the kitchen, looking, seeing, and just experiencing. So whenever somebody asks for me, hey, that was fantastic, can I have the recipe? I can't really tell you how to do it. It's a process, it's a feeling. I don't know how much salt to put. I decide on how it is at that moment. So these are the sort of knowledge that we sort of gain by experience and feeling, and also time. The cooking time is not, it's not the same. Like it differs how, like, my body feels, or maybe that day is colder, so it's naturally happens. So time happens differently for different cultures. And so moving on, colonial futures in space exploration is also very important and also very close to me. So one of the interesting things is that we are lately, a lot of the power has also shifted from governments to space industries, private companies, and they're pushing forward. Like we are going through this agenda of, if you have the resources, you have the power, and if you have the power, you control the policies. And so we might feel like it's actually, we are advanced in technology, but it's getting worse and worse in terms of who's owning the space, because it's our view. When I say our, like the scientists, engineers, and people with money, that space is viewed as empty, uninhabited, and available for like this exploration and conquest. And so even though we have one of the best sort of like frameworks, is Outer Space Treaty, but it's very outdated. And it's very outdated, and our lawyers has gotten smarter. So there's so many loopholes and to get things that you actually want to do. So, and these kind of narratives, if you go to like European Space Agency website and move around, and there are some pages that says once explorers, always explorers. And so these narratives are also framing how we explore. Space is also has been a problem. And then these sort of like looking at observatories and like on the ground level science, and then the space science, we all build these knowledge systems at some way. But then whose sort of science counts? Last week I was talking about tea, yoga, and herbal, like plant-based medicine. That yoga was part of my daily life, but now it's $1 billion industry. So that we go into what counts as evidence, because I remember, like, if most of the Ayurvedic medicine, there's no publications, and these are sort of understanding knowledge system that passed on from generation to generation. And we are looking at everything in observable, measurable, and repeatable, replicable way in Western science. And so, and this also comes, like, all of these trickle down to global policies and structural change. The last part was about military. You might be surprised how much of military involved in astronomy, like observatories, institutions, and how much of our science is funded by military. And and we all sort of do things in a way that structural change. So we need a really big structural change from like policy, government, academics, outreach, everybody. But one of the ways, actually, historically, especially last, like from around 2007 onwards, that inclusion has been one of the ways to justify of change. But inclusion doesn't really mean exactly the way that we are thinking, how we are changing things. So, and all of these comes down to a responsibility that all of us have, including me, and I'm still not doing most of my work in the way I think I should be doing, because I'm also part of an academic institution. I'm also part of a publishing cycle. And there's a lot of things in my world that I would like to do differently, but doesn't really work in the same way. So we have to reclaim authority and redefine exploration. And in summary, so think about these, that land, we talk about land, and I'm sure those who have grown up living in a house or apartment, there's always land conflicts, even with your neighbors. And even with my father has all these land things going with the neighbor. And so from individual level to institutional level to multi-billion-dollar level, we have this ownership of land and how we use them in this really very much of a political way of thinking. And that in science, we sort of justify this comparing it with the knowledge system, that this is actually okay. And so co-governance is still largely missing. And what is co-governance? Co-governance is imagine the panel we had on Wednesday. That's a really good example of co-governance. And then the treaties and a lot of the policies we have are really outdated, global policies. What do we have now? We have nationalist-based policies that one nation sort of decides and everybody else have to join that. And one of the good examples is Artemis Accords from NASA, that one of the that recently came out, treaties that almost if you don't sign it, you can't really explore moon, kind of, that's sort of a way of narrative. And then it's also, we had to think about how do we redistribute power within academia. Even the last speaker said, and something I live for, that everything we have done, all the problems we discussed this whole week are created by all of us. And we are in that system, we are part of the problem, and we should be able to change it. And most of us are in positions that can change. And so one of the reasons that UN, the Decolonising Science sessions are happening is that reason. And it is for the policy, and it is for reframing things and so on. And lastly, I want to pitch very quickly, this year we'll have the sessions focused on ethical reflections on sample-ridden missions. For my scientific field, I really need samples from outer space, because that's what astrobiology craves for. But we also don't do it in the right way, because there's no laws in space and policies. If you have the money and the resources, you can go to any object, celestial object, and bring back samples. And we only have certain ethical policies, really strict ones, to follow once we actually get them on Earth. So yeah, this is what we are going to discuss this year in September. Please join. It's online. It's going for a couple of days. And I'll wrap up there. Thank you so much.
Awesome talk as always. We've got time for one question. Do we have any online? Sorry. Christian.
Thank you. That's very thoughtful, fantastic talk. You talked about true co-governance redefining authority, not just process. I was wondering if you can point to any treaties or policies or governments that you would like to see in this space to sort of get that true co-governance happening.
I think, yeah. So it is very, honestly, if I give a hopeful sound, none of these are very hopeful at all. And I'm constantly at a place that I rethink, I mean, should I still invest all my mental energy on this or not? in recent times, there hasn't been a really good example that co-governance happening except for one of the SKO, but also as SKO as a whole organization, it's not the same way that was presented. It's just Australian part actually did very well. I think that's a good example. And then the other one, not in astronomy, but in marine biology, there's a really good example that because there were in recent times, there were a lot of issues of marine samples being in tropical zone, countries in tropical zones. And so there's a new treaty within marine biology for the countries in tropical zones that most of the countries signed that in order to take samples are as part of like a ownership belongs to the country, and that you cannot even with so much of power, because there's certain ways that we do. Last week we also discussed a lot of the funding for tropical zone countries that comes from global north, but scientific questions we address are also set up by the global north. So we don't have a say in what we want to study. And so there's a new treaty, new, like 3 years old treaty for the tropical zone. I can look up and send you that. But that's a really good example from marine biology that astronomers can also learn.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.